Peter was the grandson of Mikhail Fyodorovich. He became the ruler of the Russian state, which in Europe was still often referred to as Muscovy, largely due to Polish-Lithuanian propaganda that evoked memories of a once fragmented land. Peter understood that for his country to prosper, it needed access to the sea. To the south, that meant the Black Sea, which required pushing back the weakening Ottoman Empire. However, efforts to gain allies for a war against the Turks were unsuccessful. Instead, Peter soon shifted his attention to Sweden, a country that, by the early 18th century, had transformed from a provincial state into a true European empire dominating the Baltic Sea. Peter launched a war against Sweden in 1700. Along with his allies, Saxony and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, he entered the Great Northern War, which lasted for 21 years. Russia initially suffered a series of defeats but eventually turned the tide. In 1703, a new fortress was founded on land reclaimed from the Swedes, which would become St. Petersburg, and years later, the new capital. The war ended in 1721 with Russia's decisive victory. Peter received the title of emperor, and the Russian Empire was officially born. Russia was now recognized as a European power. Yet despite all his accomplishments, Peter failed to leave behind a worthy heir. He executed his only surviving son for treason, a decision that threw the empire into turmoil. Thus began the era of palace coups, a time of constant power struggles and intrigue, where rulers were placed on the throne not by inheritance, but by conspiracies and the military. Peter's close ally, Alexander Menshikov, placed Peter's widow Catherine on the throne, but she died shortly after, and power passed to Peter II, a boy not even 13 years old. In the early months of his reign, he was completely under Menshikov's control, but noble factions managed to push Menshikov out and exile him to Siberia. The young emperor died soon after of smallpox. The throne then passed to Anna Ioannovna, daughter of Peter's brother. Her reign marked a period of stagnation as Germans and foreign favorites dominated government positions. After her death, power went to her niece Anna Leopoldovna and her infant son Ivan VI, whose regency became the subject of violent infighting among aristocrats. In 1741, Peter's daughter Elizabeth seized the throne. Her rule was marked by opulence, lavish balls, and strong French influence. Arts and culture flourished, but again, no clear heir was left behind. After her death, power passed briefly to her nephew, Peter III, and then to his wife, Catherine II. Her reign brought the Russian Empire to new heights. Catherine skillfully navigated international politics, welcomed Enlightenment thinkers, and fostered economic growth. Military victories led to the annexation of Crimea and large parts of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Education flourished, and the nobility gained unprecedented freedoms at the expense of the peasantry. Catherine understood well where her power came from. Her son Paul did not. Paul sought to rein in the nobility and improve the lives of the peasants. For that, he was murdered just 4 years into his reign. His son Alexander came to power through that very coup. Early in his reign, he spoke of constitutional limits on monarchy and initiated liberal reforms in the economy, administration, and society. He even allowed serfs to buy their freedom. But in 1812, Napoleon's invasion derailed his reformist agenda. After Russia's victory, Alexander helped form the Holy Alliance, a coalition of monarchs meant to preserve peace and order in Europe. In reality, the alliance was seen as a tool for suppressing national uprisings and propping up absolute rulers, regardless of their people's will. Disillusioned, Alexander turned to conservatism, frustrating a younger generation of nobles inspired by ideas of liberty and democracy. These tensions came to a head when Alexander's brother Nicholas ascended the throne. Having only been trained in military matters, Nicholas was unprepared for rule. His accession was immediately challenged by a failed uprising of young liberal officers, an event that haunted him for the rest of his reign. Nicholas I clung to autocracy, expanding the bureaucracy and crushing dissent. Russia became known as the gendarme of Europe, intervening in foreign revolutions, even when uninvited. But by the end of his reign, the Crimean War exposed the empire's weaknesses. Defeated by a coalition of advanced Western powers, aiding the Ottomans, Russia found itself politically isolated and technologically behind. Internally, the country faced deepening social and economic crises. For decades, free thought and revolutionary ideas were ruthlessly suppressed, yet discontent continued to grow. His son Alexander II inherited a volatile empire. Known as the Great Reformer, he tried to steer Russia away from the path it had taken under his father. He sought to restore international prestige through alliances with the United States and China, countering Europe's dominance. The empire expanded, annexing the North Caucasus and the Far East. His sweeping reforms transformed Russia, legal equality increased, local self-governance was introduced, and in 1861 serfdom, essentially slavery, was finally abolished. However, the economy struggled. Famine struck rural areas, national debt rose, and peasant uprisings broke out. Alexander II loosened the state's grip, and soon radical organizations emerged, convinced that Russia's happiness required the Tsar's death. Despite his reformist efforts, he survived 6 assassination attempts. The 7th succeeded, ironically, just as he was preparing to introduce the empire's first constitution. His son, Alexander III, witnessing his father's fate, rejected liberalism entirely. He ended the reform era, reinstated strict censorship, and reinforced absolute monarchy. By the time his son Nicholas II came to power, the empire was deeply out of sync with the modern world. On the eve of the 20th century, as humanity embraced new ideas and values, Russia remained rooted in the past, unprepared for the storms to come.